Changeling of the Guard, written by vdrake77, narrated by Equinox3141. Chapter 23, Mourning Woods.
In other words, recruits, there's only two ways timberwolves die. They burn, or something larger eats them. Thankfully, under most circumstances, they are not aggressive.
There was a plethora of information that was deemed important to being a guard I was finding. The physical aspects of the training were intense, true, but the education was, according to Shining Armor, something of a crash course, and though I could see no concern amongst the Pegasi, while we rested our tired and sore muscles, polished our armor, or otherwise were not employed in a task that required our utmost attention, we received a great deal of information of varying usefulness. Hydras could not be killed by decapitation directly, but they could be suffocated by tricking them into eating rocks too large for them to swallow. Ursa minors and majors could be lured with music, preferably classical, but they had shown a surprising interest in tambourines, though it seemed to make them more excitable than sleepy, and unless one wanted to flatten a hillside, a dancing Ursa was rarely desired. The rare Wendigo was to be dealt with by newlyweds, the newer the better in most cases. Manticores were usually dealt with via sleep spells, and a brave half-dozen guards would milk the stingers for anti-venom. Buffaloes were both peacefully nomadic and fiercely territorial. They ranged in and out of large portions of southern Equestria, and had no issues with any who traveled with or past them, but often grew restless if any of their ranging territory had new permanent structures built on it. Many of the long and winding paths went for decades at a time without being roamed before, suddenly becoming absolutely necessary to their trail, and woe betide those who had foolishly built homesteads, but generally they held no ill will towards the builders of such temporary obstructions. Griffins, unfortunately, were a different matter. There had been peace, officially, for centuries. That didn't make the borders any less dangerous. There were always problems on both sides, ponies who thought it would cause no trouble if they started farming the fertile lands on the edge of the griffin borders, and the griffins who took offense to the hooved mammals in their sky. Bloodshed, while not common, was too often an occurrence to call it rare. As a rule, those on the border didn't care a whit for equestrian law, and ponies on their territory were expected to walk softly and fly at their own peril. One of the Pegasi in our class pointed out that there was some sort of an exchange program going on in Cloudsdale, but most weren't exactly hopeful with the results. A handful of griffin chicks had been sent, and every Pegasi that had been rebuffed as not worth their time. Not that any sane parent would send their children to Griffin Land anyway. Our trainer snorted derisively.
Celestia has a lot of sway with most, but you'd be surprised how much weight she can throw around there. If Celestia says she's watching out for those fools, any sane griffin would give their lives for their safety. They'll croak, caw, and roar at any fool who thinks they're getting one over on them. But when Princess Celestia comes to call, they're a bunch of songbirds. That aside, you use your magic on a griffin, you better be ready for a tussle. They take offense, and they take it hard. A lot of them don't think it's natural, unclean, or some such.
After a moment, Shining raised a hoof.
Sir, why do we make so much effort with them? It sounds like they, well, hate 2/3 of our population. Not all of them, recruit. There's the rub. As a rule, they don't like having magic used on them. Doesn't feel right. Might even hurt them a bit. But there are plenty who like ponies just fine, like seeing magic shows and watching the Wonderbolts. And a lot of those live on the border, travel in when they feel the need. What you need to watch out for are the ones who are viciously against. Griffins don't have a governing body like we do. Griffins might say they have no trouble with ponies, and as a whole, they don't. But the rare few that do, they have beaks like shears, talons that can puncture armor, and every last one of them can fly. One griffin out to make trouble can ruin a family's day, and troublesome flocks together? No real government means only the rest of the griffins being decent keeps the troublemakers from being a blight to those who can't protect themselves. And even the ones that like us don't see as much cause to interfere on our behalf. Fly or fall, they call it. Had a king years back, but even then he was more of a figurehead to the rest than a ruler. And every big mountain out there has its own hierarchy. The higher you live, the more important you are. Leader lives at the peak, and bigger mountains mean more bragging rights. Any laws laid down varies from mountain to mountain. And if you see one that says no ponies allowed, you better understand that they aren't waiting to be friends, and the crown itself will have to intervene to get you out. So please, those of you who go to the Griffish borders, don't be that pony. Celestia might not give you the hoof upside the head you deserve, but the rest of us will, and gladly.
And so it went. Much of the information seemed unlikely to be useful. About 1 in 1,000 ponies was allergic to breezy dust and could go into convulsions when presented with the tiny fairy ponies, and others were absolutely worthless as far as I could tell. Apparently, ponies only eat 3 spiders a year, which is an absolute shame. But then we had received information that was stunningly useful in my opinion, only to be treated as unlikely to come up to any use at all. Chewing charcoal to absorb poisons fascinated me, but most ponies expressed disgust at the very idea. I had finally determined the proper way to shine my bronze hoof shell for the perfect amount of reflectiveness when I realized we were discussing the Everfree Forest.
Which is why it has the highest concentration of monsters in the equestrian borders.
So why don't we just, burn it down? Bold commented, sounding bored. He usually did, I found. The large earth stallion was quite good at most guard duties, showing his best during combat training, but seemed to feel he had something to prove in matters of education. If all these problems come from it, why not?
Damn good question, Big Flank. Tried something like that around 1,000 years ago.
The sergeant drew a map down from the wall. I eyed it with interest, trying to trace my travels through the desert, Badlands, and back to Canterlot, but Stalingrad did not seem to appear on this map. Disappointing. I frowned, seeing a large forest that should have been on the way, but I could recall no such thing.
This is where the Everfree used to be. Once that one started to die because ponies tried to cut trails into it, the new one popped up, so they burned that one down too. The next one,
he pulled a second map down,
grew right around the castle of Royal Sisters.
Here he scowled.
And it grew fast. New trees came out of nowhere, daily, according to records. The princess herself eventually moved the capital to Canterlot because it became untenable. Forest didn't like it, apparently.
Alright, so why does it matter? No royal god with any sense at all would set a hoof within 10 miles of that forest, and... Sir? Why are you smiling? The following day, on the edge of the Everfree Forest, Bull retained a very sour mood, and it looked like as though it would continue for at least the rest of the day. I, myself, was hardly filled with great cheer at the prospect of entering this wretched place for any reason. This appeared to be shared by the 20-odd ponies and even their sergeants.
All right, recruits, groups of 5. Each group stick to an officer. You will rendezvous out here no later than dusk. This is a border patrolling. Unless you are ordered and specifically ordered, you do not enter this forest. Stop pitching tents.
Oh, praise Celestia, Bold murmured, sounding vastly relieved.
Armor, Big Flank, pick a recruit each and prepare to enter the forest. We roll out in 5.
Bold only barely managed to hide his curse with a cough, but the glare he cut at the rising sun was bordering on treasonous. He then looked about, finally settling on a navy blue Pegasus mare with a brown mane. I recognized her as one of his preferred sparring partners. She too had a tendency to fling me about in an undignified manner. She seemed pleased by the attention and strutted up proudly. To my great distress, Shining aimed a questioning look towards myself. Still, he was ordered to pick a pony, and apparently chose myself. I could not for the life of me guess what logic the sergeant had in delegating the task of choosing, but decided that it was simply not my place. I marched up, though I maintained a more suitably neutral expression than the mare had. The opportunity for obedience was its own reward.
Sir,
Shining Armor stated with a salute, just before we entered the forest.
I hate to bring this up, sir, I really do, but my mare friend is pretty vehement that I shouldn't ever set hoof in the forest. Absolutely not, she said. Personally, I'd love to, but you understand. Recruit, do I look like I give a buck what your mare friend wants? I'm giving you the order to do just that, so do it. Yes, sir, gladly, sir.
And with that, Shining Armor trotted several yards into the forest before turning around, grinning widely.
So where to?
The sergeant looked dumbfounded. Then, with a sigh and a shake of his head, he muttered,
I feel like I'm going to regret that.
Most likely, sir. I agreed, finding the forest even more forbidding than expected. I could sense maliciousness to it, as though the forest itself did not want my presence, or for that matter, any of our group. Our sergeant spared me a quick scowl, but stepped after Shining and swiftly took the lead down a path of sorts, overgrown and covered in vines.
This is just a quick run to get your hooves under you. One of the tasks of the Royal Guard is to rescue the pumpkins who get lost in here from time to time. With luck, we bring them back. With more, alive.
And we're going in? Bold squeaked, which seemed odd coming from him.
Tartarus, recruit, this isn't even through the border. There's a guard outpost here, kept stocked with supplies. It doesn't get dangerous for the first few miles, and for that you'll be fine during the day. Don't eat that, Hooves, it's poisonous. Keep up and don't touch anything blue.
Why not anything blue? What's wrong with blue? The mare questioned. Her name eluded me. I attributed that to the consistent head trauma when I sparred with her. It did not make me more confident. Thundercloud, I thought.
Don't ask questions. Just obey. If it's blue, it might be worse than poison. Stay away from blue. Now spread out a bit. Keep an eye out. Anything starts coming for you, scream and get out of its way.
I followed them, avoiding anything that even appeared blue, which seemed to be a disturbing amount of things. Something splashed in a stream nearby, and when I investigated briefly, wondered if it was perhaps a fish. I saw something bubbling just beneath the surface, and then something dark streaked through the water, and the bubbles stopped. I swiftly returned to my group, feeling distinctly queasy. Still, the shadows were growing disturbingly long before a brisk pace slowed.
What in the deepest pit of Tartarus?
The sergeant groaned, then picked up his pace. We were perhaps 5 feet away when I recognized the shack for what it was. The walls were covered in vines, moss grew everywhere, and, in general, I could not tell if it had been intentionally camouflaged or was simply terribly maintained.
Woods! Meadows!
The door creaked only a bit, enough for a pony to peer at us with one frightened eye. Then the door flew open and a green hoof gestured us in, armor stained.
Get in! Get in! The buck have you been doing out here, Woods? This outpost is falling apart!
The sergeant practically roared. He stormed inside, glaring.
What? You don't have any supplies! Where's your rations? Where's Meadows?
Sir, Forrest is in a very bad mood, sir. I recommend we abandon this post. Now, immediately, if not sooner.
What? Shh! They'll hear you! Soldier, where is your partner?
The sergeant growled, gritting his teeth. Again, for the non-carnivore species, pony's growling was always remarkably intense. Haven't seen him in days. A week, maybe 2. The green pony whimpered. I stared at the shaggy, unkempt pony in dismay. Even his armor had stains on it. Can't leave. Things out there. Hear them at night. Big things. Manticores and hydras and everything. Have to lock the door so they don't get in. Can't say how long. Can't get provisions. And Meadows had our dragon fire. Can't get provisions and had to graze.
You've been grazing in the Everfree?
This time the sergeant sounded almost as horrified as he was furious. It's actually really good grass, sir. The sergeant's expression bordered on murderous.
Clearly.
He took a deep breath, calming himself.
We're getting you out of here, and we'll send a search party for Meadows. Recruits, settle down. We're in for the night.
The green earth pony stared at us, then at him. You brought rookies into the Everfree? What's wrong with you?
This was supposed to be in and out. Recruits, Dank Woods, one of the wardens of the Everfree.
Shining looked distressed.
You're one of the wardens? You aren't what I expected.
He lit the darkening room with his horn. Moss had spread even under the doorframe amazingly. As I watched, a tendril grew across the glass, thickening until what had been a strand was now a thick rope of vine that seemed to be quickly hardening. Try spending 6 months in this horror story forest.
Tours are 3 months, soldier. Every pony knows you don't keep anyone here longer than that. The forest gets something of a taste for them.
Woods giggled. Who are we supposed to complain to exactly? I stared into the growing darkness. Sir, is this the best time for discussing logistics? The stallion grunted, eyeing the 4 of us.
No, but right now leaving isn't an option. Shouldn't have taken us this long to get out here. Forest might be moving again. If that's the case, we need to let Canterlot know and verify it isn't spreading towards Ponyville. If it is, relocation.
Bold stared at all of us.
Wait, we're staying here? In the shack? Not behind fortifications or something? Best defense here is not being noticed, but the point of the outpost is that you have to be able to find it. Fortifications would mean cutting down trees. Cutting down trees is dangerous here. Things start paying attention. For now, we're bedding down. You do have spare bedrolls, Woods.
Of course, sir. And so we bedded down for the night, my first night in the Everfree Forest. I will not say we slept, as every unnatural sound, from the creaking of the shack to the screams of the myriad of horrors that the forest had to offer, kept us unnecessarily alert. I couldn't help but resent my fellows a bit in this. After all, if they could stop feeling so much fear, surely I too wouldn't have had so much distress. I chalked it up to being the whims of ponies, but when Shining finally put up his shield silencing the outside world while bathing us in its soft glow, I couldn't help but feel a bit guilty. We, at least, had the dubious privileges of the shack and Shining's shield. Poor Meadows, wherever he was, had to do without. The next morning, I learned that finding a manticore on your doorstep was not the worst thing that could happen to a pony. Finding half of one is actually more disturbing by far.